Hey, welcome to the High Carbon Lifestyle Podcast. This is Jason Isaac. I'm the CEO of the American Energy Institute, joined by Trisha Curtis, host of the Petro Nerds podcast, the CEO of Petro Nerds, and also our newly named chief economist. I want to just jump in. And Trisha, I know I've been talking to you a lot recently about some of the updates at the American Energy Institute, some of the things we've been working on. We're great. We're kind of nimble. We just get things done. But sometimes we're not always aware of what it is that we're doing. So I think it's great that you and I get an opportunity to catch up. Today is April 10th. It is Friday. It is 4 o'clock in the afternoon in Texas, as I call it, Texas time. I wish we were on Texas time. No time changes. I don't like German energy policy, and daylight saving time is German energy policy that we imported in the 1900s. But I digress. A couple of things. We just published a report on our website, AmericanEnergyInstitute.com, about captured courts and how the Federal Judicial Center has been corrupted by the national academies, and how there are people that are of counsel of law firms suing energy companies that are now writing training manuals for the judges that are hearing those cases. So this is complete corruption at its worst. This is stuff that wasn't noted in this training manual that the Federal Judicial Center just announced and released on December 31st, 2025. I don't know what you were doing on New Year's Eve, but I wasn't releasing an over 2,000-page training manual that I wanted people to see. I might have been releasing one that I didn't want people to see, and note that we had the climate cult that was writing the manual for us. We published a report on that. It really breaks down the national academies and how some of the leadership of the national academies is making over 7 figures a year. That's $1 million in compensation from an organization that is supposed to be dedicated to science, that was started during the Lincoln administration. That's Abraham Lincoln. In 1863 is when the national academies were started to really provide science and research to government agencies. Now, unfortunately, it's completely corrupt. They've got leadership making over $1 million. Their 74% of their funding in 2024 came from government taxpayers. They had some of their other funding came from dark money organizations, which, interestingly enough, Bernie Sanders is putting information out saying that we need to stop dark money. Well, guess what? There goes your funding for the climate cults, because they get their money from dark organizations and foreign funding sources. And then, not surprisingly, this leadership of the national academies is making over 7 figures. You won't be surprised to note that where they're giving their money to, it's Democrat organizations, Democrat campaigns. Yeah, it's just so shocking that they're actually taking taxpayer dollars and funding leftist organizations with those taxpayer dollars. It's government-funded campaigns of the worst kind. They're funding communists and socialists. Have no ever intention of anything to drive down the cost of energy. They want to drive down the use of energy, but not the cost of energy, like what we're trying to do here at the American Energy Institute. We also just published a report on how there's foreign funding going into data center opposition, which is interesting. I was in the legislature 10 years ago, served in the Economic Small Business Development Committee, and we were trying to go out and attract data centers, and it worked because Texas has over 400 data centers now. There's proposals to add another 100. This is kind of mind-boggling that now all of a sudden data centers are a bad thing. And I've started seeing signs in my neighborhood, no data centers. And then I saw Indivisible, this almost terrorist organization, this alarmist organization, post some social media in Indianapolis. Interestingly enough, they received over $7 million of foreign funding to attack data centers. These are the same organizations that go after affordable and reliable energy, primarily from hydrocarbons, oil and gas and coal, and nuclear. They're geared up to fire up the grassroots and get them alarmed and scared and active and protest. Well, they called out a particular city council member in Indianapolis last week, or earlier this week, I should say, and called him out by name in social media posts. And then what happens on Friday? He wakes up wakes up to gunfire ringing through his door. 13 rounds. There was a note stuck under his doormat that said, "No data centers." So this is Sierra Club and Indivisible posting about this city council, men trying to alarm people. Well, it worked, and it got people fired up, literally attacking a city councilman who had just voted to support a data center in Indianapolis, sees it as an economic development tool. Certainly there are some concerns around data centers and the water that they're consuming and using, especially here in Texas and priority groundwater management areas. It's a valid concern. But the opposition to data centers is certainly not organic. People are being manipulated by left wing.
Coming from China?
I'm sure that it is. It's really flowing through the UK, through Swiss, but there are Arabella Networks, which is a dark money funded organization that has CCP connections or reported CCP connections, is funding some of this opposition as well. So China doesn't want us to win, and you know this better than anybody, Trisha. China doesn't want us to win on energy. They certainly don't want us to win on AI. But you look at some of the innovations that have come out of artificial intelligence. And I worked for decades in the trucking industry trying to improve the efficiency of trucking companies, trying to make them safer, more efficient, use less fuel, reduce cost. I've been reading some stuff about what is happening in the farming and ranching community. A 67% reduction in herbicides because farmers are using technology that uses AI. So they have cameras planted on their farming equipment, and the cameras can identify what's a weed and what's actually a crop and only treat the weed, not treat the crop with herbicide, because the crop, they want it to grow plentiful. So this is an incredible savings of money. That's just one example of an opportunity where we can be more efficient as a country. We can provide food for more people and actually reduce the cost of food. The implications in transportation of making routes more efficient, making trucks more efficient, transport of the goods that you and I consume on a daily basis more efficient, are just an absolutely incredible win. And then the last thing I want to put on, talk about real quick is we filed a comment with the EPA to Administrator Zeldin earlier this week. It's really not a comment, it's a petition about the low carbon fuel standards that have been implemented in 4 states around the country. It's about a $22 billion impact to consumers in California. Gavin Newsom's been on this terror about how fuel prices are up, and blasting Chevron for making profits, which I love it because then the fact checkers come out and show that California actually takes more per gallon of fuel sold than Chevron makes in profit on a gallon of fuel sold. So California is the biggest beneficiary of fuel being sold in the state of California. But this low carbon fuel standards is $22 billion of economic impact. Those are costs that refiners have to pay. They either have to buy these credits of other types of fuel, ethanol, renewable natural gas, biodiesel, or pay the state of California. Regardless, it's a massive impact and cost at the price of a gallon of fuel, gasoline, or diesel for transportation fuels. Well, California, unfortunately, has the authority under the Clean Air Act to implement this program. Other states do not. And that was the petition that we filed with the Environmental Protection Agency. Expect hopefully a decision on this in a matter of months. But what you could see almost immediately is out of Washington, Oregon, and New Mexico, reduction of up to 20 cents per gallon on the cost of fuel in these states because of their unconstitutional and illegal low carbon fuel standards that they don't have the authority to implement. And so this could be great for refiners and great for consumers in those particular states. So I wanted to give you a quick update of some of the work that we've been doing. Love to hear about what you've been up to and what's going on in the market.
A lot. So you don't get to sleep a lot with a market like this. So that's fantastic. And I think for listeners, so I didn't know, is this a high carbon lifestyle podcast? I thought the best name is American Energy,
Yeah.
like American Energy, but we will work on this. Jason and I are we've been working through the kinks of this because I have my own podcast. Jason's been on it a lot. We'll try to make this on the Petro Nerds platform, once a month thing where I kind of push Jason to really get into the market weeds, because he's really good about asking very good questions and keeping the guardrails on me, because I kind of do the Trump weaving thing where I'm all over the place. So Jason's great at that. And he's going to have to do that now because we have a lot of ground to cover in a short time period of what's happening in the market. So I'll be honest, not sleeping a lot, have to stay up quite late to watch the market coverage. I love to say I have a reprieve on the weekend, but not really, because Trump is active on the weekend, as we've seen from the start of the year. So not complaining. I just keeping busy on the market. So I would say, right now it's April 10th, 2026. It's Friday. We just saw a drop down. Oil prices were at like $95 a barrel for WTI, roughly the same for Brent. those contracts don't get too excited when you see WTI above Brent. That's just the timing of these contracts is, May versus June, and those are coming in line. What really has happened over the course of this week was a ceasefire, kind of tentative. We're only 3 days into this tentative ceasefire that started on Tuesday. And so what happened over the weekend, again, important, Trump put this and this was Easter weekend, busy Easter weekend. We were able to, on one of the many military accomplishments and military feats that is not being, we'll talk about for the execution of this military. You can disagree or agree with the war, but the execution by our military has been phenomenal. And we saw it last summer with the bunker busting bombs. We saw it with the seizure of Maduro, and we saw it really with this, getting a soldier back home without any casualties. People were injured, but that was incredible. So that what happened over the weekend. And over Easter weekend, a lot of people called it the Easter miracle, but we did get our lost soldier home or back. And so then over the weekend, also Trump, or right, maybe it was Monday or Sunday, I can't remember. He dropped a Twitter post that used the F-bomb, and that was not intended for the American audience. Not sure it takes a rocket scientist to figure that out. This was definitely intended for those whoever's running Iran, and people say, oh, you can't, how could we be talking to him if we don't have leadership? We do this all the time, folks. We backchanneled with the Russians during the height of the Cold War. There's always backchanneling, and not dissimilar to, and I disagree with a lot of what Henry Kissinger did with China, but during the Nixon-Kissinger moves, in when they brought China into the fold, they were using Pakistan as an intermediary. That's because Pakistan borders, in this case, Pakistan actually borders Iran, and is friendly with China, so they act as an intermediary. The leadership has had a good relationship with Trump. Yeah, like it or lump it, that's what we have. Is Pakistan acting as an intermediary, basically passing notes. So they did get to the table. Now, is this the question, of course, by the doomsayers on the stock market, and you have to be very careful. I'm watching Bloomberg right now because I don't have access to CNBC on a live stream. They don't talk about like the anti-Semitic tone that they should be calling out when there is real anti-Semitism. So that's very real. We've heard it through the course of this war, especially when Joe Kent resigned. And I thought that was abysmal and needs to be called out. And then there's just there's a lot of lack of intel on just what's going on right on the ground, and that comes from. We didn't spend any time talking about oil prices before. The stock market wasn't doing their homework before. Nobody was doing their homework on oil and gas. And now, if you turn on Bloomberg or the stock market and you're trying to get oil and gas coverage, you'll notice you get very little on gas because the people on TV they don't even know the metrics it's in. They can't even say it. So they just don't talk about it. Like, it's absolutely horrible. So then you get everybody talking about oil. And so we'll rewind a bit and tell everybody where we're at and how we got there. But we have this ceasefire that got, basically that all the Truth Social posts and the saying, hey, we are gonna hit your civilian facility, we're gonna hit your power infrastructure, we're going to hit Iran really hard if we don't do the ceasefire. So they say, okay, we're doing it, and then within 24 hours, I think they said that nobody's holding up their end of the bargain. Well, Lebanon was not included in that ceasefire, so Israel and Lebanon have their own thing going on, as we've known for a long time. That wasn't included. That has since been brought into the fold. We're having Israel is actually in conversations with Lebanon. There's stuff going on. There's lots of stuff happening in Europe. Lots of deals or conversations are happening over the weekend. So it will be a very busy weekend from a diplomatic standpoint. What's happened is that, and I did a lengthy recording on the Petro Nerds podcast with a woman, Tatiana Matrova, and we speak about this at length about what's happening in the Strait of Hormuz, what's going on with Russia. It's really good. And, we were talking about this as not to downplay it, but this is really a logistical issue, right, within the Strait of Hormuz. Iran does not have control of the Strait of Hormuz. They have fear over it for sure. Whether or not they put mines in it, we don't really know. They have put out maps saying if you're going to take a route, you do it this way. And Trump's complaint is, hey, you said you're going to open up the Strait of Hormuz and you haven't. And the reason it's not flowing fully is because people are still fearful that they're going to get hit. They're going to get targeted. And Iran is saying, okay, we'll let you flow through, but you have to talk to us first. And you have to pay us $2 million a vessel in cryptocurrency. And then we will tell you the route that you need to take. Now, are they telling us that route because they mined it? Or are they telling us that route because they want us to think they mined it? Or are they telling so they can just keep this pseudo control? It's not like there's a gate, folks, where it's like shut, right? you can do it. You're just taking the risk, and you actually can get insurance on your ships. It's just very expensive. And so it was roughly 20 million barrels a day of crude and it was 15 million barrels a day of crude and product. 15 million barrels a day of oil, I believe, if I have the number right, and 5 million barrels a day of refined product. That's basically been halved, right? You have like out of what we're pulling out of the Gulf, it's sort of probably like we're off by 8 million barrels a day. It's a lot of oil, right? 8 to 10. I'm not sure we've got the numbers perfectly right. I'm frustrated that stuff isn't covered well, and that they call it the transponders, that the ships they turn them off, so we don't know. But we have satellite imagery, so we should be having a pretty good understanding. And so people get up on TV at night and late at night on the Middle East Open, and they say, "Oh, we only have like 2 ships moving through, and those 2 ships are Iranian vessels, and they're going to China." China is getting all the crude from Iran that they were pre-conflict, right? Pre-war, they were getting about 2 million barrels a day. So a very large crude carrier, a VLCC, that one holds 2 million barrels. So if one of those is moving out of the Strait of Hormuz, just one, that is 2 million barrels a day. And so it takes a long time. These are not fast ships or anything like that. So we know it's come down to a trickle. But is it two ships a day? I think it's probably higher. And we hear anecdotal evidence that it's maybe 15 ships. Well, 15 is not 2. And so I'm not downplaying it, that it's beyond serious, and it's cut off Japan, it's cut off India, and it's cut off many Asian nations from vital supplies that they need on a daily basis. And so for India, they don't have LPG now. They don't have liquefied petroleum gas, like propane, and they use it for cooking fuel. They've done a massive effort to switch from coal and all this stuff in to cook with, and now it's impacting their gig economy and their delivery food economy. And those people now don't have work because they can't do that, because they're saying, hey, everyone at home can have the LPG for what little they have left. Well, the people at home don't have a job, so now it's a huge mess. So this is really real in Asian countries, particularly in India. Well, India signed long-term contracts with Qatar. So that's where all of their gas was coming from, was Qatar. Now they no longer have that. So now, as much as India is maybe not loving the Trump administration, they are looking at U.S. gas, as is everyone is looking at U.S. gas, because we have rule of law. You can depend on our supplies, right? And so it's really putting, I think, in the medium term and long term for sure, and maybe even a shorter term, U.S. natural gas in a much in a really, really good position, and in globally thinking about where this all goes and how we flow this stuff. So it's really important to think about diversity of supply for all these countries. So that's kind of on the gas side. Obviously, had huge implications for India in terms of fertilizers and what they're importing, because they're making fertilizers with natural gas. For us, for the U.S., it's an impact in terms of price, right? We're sitting at $95 a barrel right now. It came off a little bit, and that's because Trump has said, hey, we got to open the Strait of Hormuz. The market's doing all kinds of things in terms of trading. But when this ceasefire was announced on Tuesday, oil prices sold off $20 a barrel, massive sell-off in crude oil. And so now what we have is, we have that. We still have things getting hit here and there with drones. And I'm not to say that's not to be expected, but this is a ceasefire in the Middle East. So yes, that is to be expected. This is the Middle East we're dealing with. So nothing is written in stone. And it can be you have hardliners within the IRGCCC. You have people. It's top down. You don't even know who's in charge. We literally don't know if the new guy is still alive. So you have all these fractions that are kind of making their own decisions, and so we could see how that's going on. The fact that they're asking for tolls, and they want $2 million a vessel, and they want cryptocurrency. They're trying to exert this influence. Obviously, the Trump administration doesn't want it. So we're in this hiatus period of where this is going to go. But obviously, with this a little sell-off in oil prices, and for the U.S., we are not short supply. We have plenty of crude oil in the U.S. We're seeing that in the weekly data. We are just now, we just now starting to see the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the release that we did, which was an exchange, which means that the crude is going to come back into the reserve, which is a good thing. So you exchange it, you take it out, and then you swap it back in. Not sure the market fully appreciated this, and I think that's, right now, as these ships, we're getting a bunch of ships coming into the U.S., and they're going to pick up this crude oil that's released from the SPR, in addition to the crude oil that we export. The 4 million barrels a day crude oil that we export, they're going to be picking up more crude oil, probably another 1 million barrels a day, and bringing that onto the market. That's awesome. That's super good for, quelling global oil prices. Could put a little pop, I think, little bit of support in West Texas Intermediate in WTI prices. But it's overall, it's beneficial. And I would just say, I don't think a lot of this, I'm doing a lot of homework and a lot of studying, and I don't hear this comprehensively explained in the stock market within coverage. I hear a lot of people, complaining about things and saying how bad it is, but not really where we are for oil prices, where we're looking to go. And then we also just had the CPI report, the inflation report come out today. I wouldn't say it's better than expected. It's 3.3%. It's sort of as expected, right? When you have that high of oil price increase, you had a 12.5% increase in energy prices. So that's largely where this is coming from. Food prices were up 2.7. I think it's a little early to say that food is up because of oil. That doesn't turn around that fast, folks, for food. So that means we have a food problem. So we still have, hiking at the grocery store, and that's problematic. So tell me where you want to take it. That was a lot.
Yeah, I know. And it was interesting. You talk about fertilizer, and I was reading some headlines. I spoke at the 16th International Conference on Climate Change earlier this week in Washington, D.C., talking about food prices in Europe. This is a headline from last year, and I like to go through some of the climate alarmist headlines. The headline from last year: food prices in Europe increased by 50% due to climate crisis. They always leave out the word policy because it's the policies that have been implemented, the people that think are going to deal with a climate, so-called climate crisis that we're all living wonderfully well through. And that's what's happened. The Buckeye Institute had a paper a few years ago that talked about the number of fertilizer plants in the EU that were offline because of the Russia-Ukraine war. They couldn't get feedstock, natural gas. They couldn't get some other commodities that they used to produce fertilizer. And this is one of the charts I saw last year. Was really a map of India showing all the fertilizer plants that were offline because they can't get access to the commodities to produce that fertilizer that produces more food. I feel like we're going to see something akin to what we saw in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka a few years ago was on the rise. They were outpacing their neighbors. They were exporting tea. They were exporting rice. And then they made the mistake of electing the first, this is what he ran under as the first ever net zero candidate on the face of the earth. And he got elected, and he immediately banned the use and importation of nitrogen-based fertilizer made from natural gas. He got a really high ESG score from the financial companies that loved him. But then within a year, food prices went up 80% because production went down 40%. And they were importing tea and rice. I mean, it was one growing season of complete failure. At the time, 9 in 10 people on a daily basis were facing hunger in Sri Lanka. And so just one policy, one elected person completely ruined a country that was experiencing prosperity for the first time ever. And so are there some valid concerns about the implications with dealing with food when it comes to access to energy that we can expect EU to see? What about in parts of Asia? What are your thoughts on that, Trisha?
Yeah, so so really serious medium and long term consequences. This all comes down to duration, and I hate to say it like that, but it is. It's how long is this going to how long do you have a actual shortage in these places, and how long do you have sustained oil prices? Because for a place like the U.S., this is about oil prices. It's not about supply, right? And that's so important when we think about security of supply. We can withstand a few months of high oil prices, but we have the supply, and the rest of the world does not. And so, the consequences for this are really meaningful in terms of how's it going to change energy consumption going forward? Because this is a very an additional wake up call that we've had in just a handful of years, from COVID to the war in Ukraine, and now this the Strait of Hormuz being closed, which has never been closed. We've never actually had this happen before. And so the consequences for Asia in what they consume and the consequences for Europe are serious, in that we're going to see doubling down on coal. We're going to see doubling down on nuclear. We're going to see changes, potential real changes in energy systems to a degree, right? Of how they're taking this, and it's going to put Qatar in not a good place because their supplies are just not going to be as reliable. So I think, to answer your question, sorry, without going back to other things, it's for Europe and for Asia and developing countries and poor countries, and I would put many in Europe actually in that category. Their economies were not in great shape before this conflict, right? And so they had very, very high energy prices in the UK, in Germany, in France, and all these places in the Netherlands, like very, very high electricity prices. And so that's only going up, not to the degree that it was in the war in Ukraine. I mean, we saw $100 MMBTU prices for nat gas during that war. Now, or ongoing war, but in the first year of that, we have $15 an MCF for Henry Hub for Dutch TTF prices right now. So not even close. You
That's still
have
like 500%, if I'm doing my math right, higher than what we're seeing here in the US, right? So
no,
we're pretty
it's
well
three.
insulated.
We're under $3 an MCF here. They're at $15 an MCF in Europe. Bad, but not. They were at 10 before the war started. So they're exposed from an inflationary standpoint, from a food standpoint, from all that, right? Like, and so that there's some real risks to the global economy that this could tip, Europe and developing nations into recession and pull down the global economy and put us into recession. That's a real risk. Because they're not accessing the supply. When we think about like India, though, specifically, and think, okay, well, they're in planting season right now, right? So they have a major agricultural economy. And so it does matter for them, if they have the fertilizer, if it impacts crop yields. There are a lot of people who are going to muster through this. I mean, I was listening to a podcast yesterday that was talking about the inability for these guys that were selling rice. They couldn't get the fuel to actually get the rice to market. By the time they got the rice to market, the rice was dried out. Then they got a discount for the rice. So in the developing world, with super agricultural focus, this is impacting. It's impacting Egypt already. And so this is very real. This is stuff we saw in the early, in the first year of the war in Ukraine. I'm not saying it can get fixed. I'm just saying, for the U.S., my grandfather was a dryland wheat farmer. My family's still farming. We don't fertilize. They probably should. It's expensive. There's plenty of stuff that you're just going to suffer a worse yield. Will we have, horrible crop yields and massive shortages? I think that's a little bit to be determined. But absolutely, is there going to be issues in these agricultural nations that cannot access the fertilizer right now? Yes. And then can we fix it? The UK thing, I mean, it's so fascinating right now is because, they're still getting, everybody in Europe is still taking Russian LNG, right? Then maybe not taking pipeline gas, and that's only because the pipeline got destroyed. Otherwise, they'd still be taking it because they're just hypocrites, largely, in terms of energy policy. But we now have Russia, like actually military vessels in the English Channel, because they are escorting their ships. And that's because early on in this war, or it wasn't actually, but early on in March, there was a Russian LNG tanker that was hit, and supposedly by that hit this. And so it's actually the first one. We actually haven't noticed anything. No LNG vessel has actually been hit in this war in Iran, to my knowledge. So it's something kind of off the table, right? It's a big deal. These are very expensive ships. And so it would be devastating. We only, as of 2024, there was only 53 BCF a day that was going via LNG, right? It's still a new and nascent market. And so you think about that, of that flowing, maybe it's probably in 2025, 60, and maybe it's a little bit more than that now. So you think of that, if you pull some of those off the market, this is problematic. And so I think the situation we're in right now is that we're a month and 10 days into this war, a month and 12 days into this war. And so you have the real consequences of where ships are finally, that would have been, had they left the Strait of Hormuz, and they would have been going, and they would have been in, the UK now. Jet fuel is the big thing that they're talking about, the lack of jet fuel. Well, hey, if you decided that you should produce your own crude oil and your own refining capacity, having some refining capacity, I mean, this is real world stuff. I'm not saying they deserve it by any means, and I'm not condoning what's absolutely not condoning what the Iranians are doing. I think Iran attacking everyone is ridiculous, including their regional allies. But it's important for Europe to have a wake-up call, which I'm not sure they will do, is that you have got to have better energy security. You have to produce your own fuels, hydrocarbons, and you have to refine it so that you are not beholden to the rest of the world when something like this happens. And even with their declining economies and their declining energy consumption, they're still exposed. And particularly, I've written about this before and told governments this, they're more so exposed because they have such vulnerable grids, and because they've tried to get off traditional fuels, but they actually don't. And so in times of crisis, they're actually more exposed to the pain points and the prices. And so it's really just a horrible situation to be in. And I think Europe is in the absolute crux of this, in this crisis.
Yeah, we saw that last year with the Spain blackouts. 1 week they're touting that they're powered by 100% solar energy, and literally the next week their grid collapses for days because they were again powered by 100% solar in the sun.
Hey, they're very clear about not helping us in this conflict.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, Spain, Italy are no friends to ours, and hey, they need to protect themselves. But you look, I liken like what the North Sea, the UK is importing a lot of energy from Norway, and it's like Texas saying, you know what, we're not going to produce oil and gas in the Permian anymore. Well, we'll
Yeah.
get it from New Mexico. We'll just, I mean, it's the same area.
So ridiculous. I know. It's exactly. It's
For
like
those of us
you
that know
have
the
it too.
Permian, it flows in, like it's in New Mexico and it's in Texas. And it's just like the North Sea. I mean, there's this area there where you can produce oil and gas, and Norway does it, and they sell it to the United Kingdom at elevated prices when the United Kingdom could be producing it themselves. But they're just that stupid that they're not going to do it. I mean, there's really no other explanation.
No,
But
and it's really just it's you should be ashamed of this aggressive green climate policies that have put you in this situation, because you can pull yourself out. You can produce this stuff, and it really does stem from decades of bad policymaking to get to this situation. But it's kind of like so it is the North Sea. Like, they have it, they could produce it. And people say, oh, we don't have it in Europe. No, you do. You have you actually have natural resources. It's well endowed with natural resources. You have chosen for decades not to produce it and to pretend that you're not consuming it. But hello, newsflash, when we have a crisis like this, you realize that the world runs on oil and natural gas. And so that's to me is one of the biggest wake up calls coming from an economist standpoint and market standpoint, is that everybody coming into this war was like, oh, $65 oil, it's okay, don't worry about anything. And we got the Venezuela guy, and that was, oil doesn't go up, it goes down. And I'm like, what is happening? Oh, we have an oil glut, we have too much oil, nobody's consuming this stuff anymore. I'm like, okay, 100 million barrels a day. So there was no focus on how we use it. And that was the hangover from COVID. That was the hangover COVID. That was the ESG hangover, the net zero. And we still have that. And I think we have to be very honest with ourselves that was still very much present. And now every stupid person, no offense, but lots of pundits are getting on TV and talking about this stuff and just saying stuff, right, to get on TV, as opposed to explaining what's actually happening. And so that's where I think, people are saying, okay, the price of oil is not reflecting reality. And to be fair, the price of oil probably should be higher given the actual closure, the fact that we're not getting these flows out of Strait of Hormuz. However, the industry is the oil and gas, especially these prices, has every incentive to get out. Right. You are seeing Iraq has made a deal with Iran. Shocker. And so they're getting some crude oil out, or trying to. They were trucking it. You are seeing the pipeline in the UAE. If it can, they were getting hit, targeted. Their export terminal just south of the Strait of Hormuz was getting targeted, but they have that pipeline running, so they're exporting crude oil. And then the Saudis have this pipeline, thank God, underground. Also, thank God, that was super smart. Like, they live in the Middle East or something. So they have this underground pipeline. It's the East-West pipeline. It's the Yanbu pipeline. So IEA, the International Energy Agency, put out a note on the Strait of Hormuz February 6th. And you can find it. You can just Google this, IEA Strait of Hormuz. You'll see this note. They say in there that, this pipeline, here's the pipelines, right? They map this out, and they say, but it's not running. It's running 2.5 million barrels a day in early February, and it likely wouldn't go to full capacity. And I thought, okay, that's crazy, because if you have a conflict, you will absolutely max out everything, and you'll probably go above your max capacity. You will add pumping stations, you will do whatever it takes. And that's exactly what happened. But it took a full 2 weeks for the whole market to admit and realize, hey, this pipeline's running full capacity, because we're trying to figure out why oil prices are still $100 a barrel, and yet you have, Iran hitting Dubai's airports, right? And so that's what happened. It's 7 million barrels a day. It's running full tilt. And they did have a drone attack that hit one of the pumping stations. That took 700,000 barrels a day offline. And when I'm hearing this on TV and the stock market, they say 700,000 barrels a day. They don't say out of 7 million barrels a day that's flowing, right? And so that's important in the context of how much is moving, and do you have storage there, and are you getting that out of the Red Sea and everything? And so it was like a week and a half ago when this got finally into the market and people understood it, then you had everyone ramping up the rhetoric, well, the Houthis are going to attack the Red Sea. Now, they could have, but we haven't seen that happen, right? So we still have this crude oil flowing. So stuff is flowing. It's just not flowing the way it was, and it's a massive logistical nightmare. It is very, very bad. But as Tatiana Matrova and I were talking, it could be worse. And I don't mean to make light of this, but oil prices are sort of telling us that to a degree. And then lastly, I'll just say, and we probably talked about this in previous podcasts and stuff, is that, on oil prices might be $95 a barrel here, but I think if you're buying jet fuel in the Middle East right now, or your localized crude, you're well over $100. You're probably $150 a barrel on cash price or flat prices or whatever they call them. And then you're also, jet fuel prices early on were as high as $250 a barrel. So this is very, very real. And that's why but the money these countries are making when they get the crude oil out is huge. And that does impact the coffers for Russia a lot. And it is helping them.
Yeah, and we're talking about this EU and UK energy policies, and unfortunately, they've taken hold here in a couple of blue states in the United States, California, namely. I don't know if you saw that Chris Wright, our Secretary of Energy, was in California this week, touting not only oil and gas being produced in Long Beach, something that used to be produced in abundance. California used to be the third highest oil and gas production state in the country. But because of regulations, they used to have 40 refineries. Today, they have less than 10. I believe the number is 8, and they're heading towards only having 6 refineries. The Attorney General is suing the Trump administration because they're bringing on a pipeline back in California. And he's saying we produce more than we use. Well, the problem is we don't use it because of all the refineries that have closed down in the United States. So we've got to produce it, export it somewhere else so it can be turned into refined goods. Then we re-import it. But yes, we are a net exporter of energy, which is a good thing. But imagine if we had 40 refineries still in California, we would be using all of the oil they could produce there and putting them into refined goods, bringing the cost down. But he was there touting and just showing how quickly they could ramp back up.
They absolutely could. They absolutely
it would be transformational to California and their budget.
Absolutely transformational. I mean, so it's a really, really serious and very present issue. And I say this because when you're looking at everything happening in the world, you need to be assessing where we're at and are we doing a good job. And I think that we need to be we need to be increasing oil output. Absolutely. And I would like the oil and gas industry to get off the fence and get to work. And I say that honestly and not particularly you have very high oil prices. Do you have certainty where oil price is going to be in 2 years from now? No, but you never did. So there are opportunities ahead. There are, the way the SPR is working, you can exchange and you can swap. I mean, so I just think that this is the moment you put the drill bit in the ground and you make money. But increasingly, thinking about California and thinking, okay, they've lost a ton of refining capacity, right? And that's really critical to U.S. not just energy security, but national security and actually defense. I mean, California is the Petroleum Administration Defense District 5, that's PAD 5. That's a term from World War II where we had organizations of our refining districts. So they had over 3 million barrels a day. They've lost over 1 million barrels a day of refining capacity, I believe, since 2010. And so COVID, they kept notching down. If you chart it on the EAA, it just is like this downward trajectory for refining, for crude oil production. So it's a really sad story, and they're super exposed to imports. So they're importing over 150,000 barrels a day from Iraq, which is, again, probably Iranian crude. So awesome. They were importing a lot of crude oil. I think it was 500,000 barrels a day from Russia during when the war in Ukraine broke out. So they were super exposed because when we were booming oil production all over the country, not only will they not produce it themselves and increase output, which they could, they wouldn't take Bakken crude oil via rail because of how evil Bakken crude, oil production, that's horrible. So they wouldn't take it, so they have to import it. So they'll get Canadian crude that they take via ship, which is, if you're from an emissions standpoint, it's much better and much cleaner and safer to transport this through pipeline. But they won't build any pipelines, so they don't want any more. And the whole thing is very similar to your point, is that we got to get off oil, right? So we'll just kill our economy, do whatever it takes to do this. It's fiction. And so they have the highest gasoline prices in the country. We have a major refining center. And I say that PAD 5, hold that in your thought, think about that. Petroleum Administration Defense District. It's a term from World War II. It matters now. It will matter in the future. You need every bit of refining capacity. We have military bases there. Go to San Diego. Fly in. Watch Top Gun, for Pete's sake. I mean, this is really serious stuff. And so we have China, who now has as much refining capacity as we do, even though they don't use they don't use 18 million barrels a day of crude and product, but they have that refining capacity. And so we have about 18 million barrels a day, and we desperately need to hold on to it. And it speaks to this, holding on to it as you're just maintenance mode. It's very hard to build refineries. And so, we haven't really built new refineries since the 1970s because of the permitting requirements are ginormous. And when the Bakken was starting to boom and we were starting to get all this U.S. shale output, I mean, it transformed our nation because we were importing crude oil and we had to get it to the rest of the parts of the country, get to the refineries. and then we start producing it like gangbusters, and then we have to get it to these refineries. And so we had to change, flows and rearrange pipelines and do all kinds of stuff. And so California didn't participate in any of this. They actually let everything decline. And the rest of the country is moving on and taking this light sweet crude, is processing it. And it's just really important is that you've got to get this right. So you can't build a refinery in North Dakota necessarily, because when you refine a barrel of crude oil, you get jet fuel and you get gasoline and you get diesel. Well, in North Dakota, you don't need as much jet fuel. You certainly could use the diesel, awesome. But what do you do with that? Then you have to move that. And so for California, they do use all this stuff, right? They do use all this stuff, and so they're going to have to import. If they let this decline, they have to import it, which just increases costs dramatically, which they already have the highest cost in the country, and it really puts us in a vulnerable position. And I would say, just put it on a map, folks. Look at California, look at Alaska. That LNG pipeline would be super important, and look at Hawaii, and how critical Hawaii also is in conflict, especially if we're talking about with China. You have to just look at this, and whether you think we'll have one or not, you have to prepare for one. And so this is a vital area that you've got to get right for crude oil storage. And crude oil storage is not just tanks, folks. It's oil in the ground and the ability to produce it. So it's really, really critical, and I think just not appreciated from a broader kind of national security framework. And we've maybe let it go unaddressed a little bit just because we're producing so much crude oil elsewhere, and they've declined. But I think it's if we could tell people, Long Beach, I mean, just all these, like Kern County, like where you have all this oil production, that it is a massively prolific oil region, and it also has complex refineries that are geared to processing heavy crude oil, high sulfur crude oil. I believe it has hydrotreating capacity for sulfur. Like, it just the potential is incredible.
I mean, you look at what's happened in Guyana over the last few years, just the last few years. This just shows you how transformative the production of oil and gas and hydrocarbons is. I mean, this is a poor country. They discovered oil and gas off their coast. Companies came in and started dumping millions of dollars in exploration and production cost. I remember reading some stories just a couple of years ago in the Wall Street Journal, how you go to the grocery store in Guyana a couple of years ago and you were lucky if you could get basic necessities. And now it's like they have choices. I mean, the stores are amazing. They're like what you would experience here in the United States, and people take that for granted. And that could happen again in California, if their politicians would just get out of the way. And you mentioned Hawaii. It was just this week, Mazie Hirono, the junior senator from Hawaii, was just blasting the Trump administration for the cost of gasoline in Hawaii. Well, never like looking to point any of the fingers back at themselves. They're always trying to blame someone else. This is someone who has supported the Green New Deal, the end of hydrocarbons, the end of fossil fuels. That would actually drive the cost of them up so much so that people couldn't afford them. And now she's mad that because of an Iran conflict, it's actually the costs are going up. You would think that she would be celebrating the increase of the cost of a gallon of gasoline and hurting people in Hawaii. I think it's also worth noting that Hawaii came in 50th, dead last, bottom on ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council's new energy affordability report that just came out in the last couple of weeks. So you need to check that out. Texas is 10th.
Literally, they're powered on diesel. That's where, on where all diesel power generation still is, which the rest of the country is using natural gas. They're on diesel because they should be liquefied natural gas. We should be exporting LNG to them, and we should power this. But the fact that they're still powered on diesel is absolutely insane. They're basically just a big generator, running all these islands, and that's insanity. Especially now when diesel prices. I mean, it's not a competition. You have sub $3 an MCF natural gas, and you've got over $5 a gallon diesel. This is when it really, really matters. And so I think we got super comfortable thinking this kind of lower forever, that we would no geopolitical risk was priced into oil. And I'm not saying that oil prices can't go back down. I think they absolutely can, and there's lots of risk to that. But yeah, we've got to be very honest with ourselves. And you mentioned Guyana, which is a good point, because if you're watching late night Bloomberg, they always give these African snippets, and the countries that are doing well in Africa right now, it's countries with refining capacity. And so when we think of, like, if you're a developing nation, refining capacity is so important. And so many countries don't have it, right? They're exposed, and UK is one of those. They're exposed to jet fuel. Heathrow is one of the most vital airports in the entire world of inbound and outbound traffic. And yet you would think it would be kind of important to have your own jet fuel. I mean, we've seen exposed in this war where they say, oh, we don't want to get involved. They couldn't get involved if they wanted to. They don't have the military capacity anymore to actually help. This is really exposing the true situation of the globe. And there's a lot of folks taking, learning from this, of realizing who's got what and who doesn't. And I think there are a lot of lessons to be learned here, and just a a reality check of this is very serious. I mean, I think what Russia's doing to Ukraine is terrible. And I think what, Iran's actions of what they're doing to the neighbors is absolutely terrible, and it needs to be stopped. But the reality is that this is an energy world we live in. Iran also produces almost 5 million barrels a day of crude and condensate. It's a lot of crude oil. So this is not nothing, and this is the world we live in. And I think this is absolutely why we need to be investing in heartily into U.S. oil and gas, and really, really working on the things that are, the grid that's going to make this resiliency and reliability, and really focusing on crude oil exports, but also liquefied natural gas exports, and making sure.
Yeah, and that's one thing I spoke of this week at the International Conference on Climate Change in DC. They asked us what some of the biggest battles were, and I think number one is our grid. We need market reform that favors reliability. We don't have that. That's why Texas came in 10th, and I don't think some people are celebrating like, oh, we're 10th. Like, we should be number one or an import in anything dealing with energy affordability. We're the number one.
Number one and number two?
I think North Dakota was number one, and Louisiana was number two. So kind of like, oh gosh, it just hurts as a Texan to like, we're 10th.
That's awesome. Good for you guys.
Yeah. Congratulations to them on winning that award. We've got to do better in Texas. We need a market that rewards reliability, and we don't have one right now. And we are continuing to see a misallocation of resource, a malinvestment in unreliable, very expensive wind, solar, and batteries. And this should not be the case. We added over 50 gigawatts of electric generation capacity over the last 5 years. We needed about 15. If we added 15 of natural gas, then ratepayers wouldn't be absorbing over $50 billion in cost. They'd be absorbing about $15 billion in cost. That's why utilities love building expensive stuff, because they get to pass those costs onto the ratepayers. And ratepayers, I've seen a 28% increase in cost for electricity over the last 5 years in Texas. And so if we're going to move in the right direction on Alec's energy affordability list, we've got to embrace market reform that rewards reliability. This high voltage transmission lines that they're building in Texas now, those costs get passed on to ratepayers. We don't need high voltage transmission lines to move unreliable electric generation out in the middle of nowhere to where people are. So really, the generators need to pay for transmission. And if they did that, they would be building transmission or generation close to where the demand is.
And then that would favor, you'd be building natural gas and coal. And I think that's the really critical part, is like how important this is for Texas. I mean, look, at $95 oil, you are not going to have high natural gas prices, because that associated gas, even though you're getting negative negative prices in the Permian that you have to pay to take it away, some people are still going to produce, right? Because they want that $95 oil. Sure as hell not going to see oil production go down. So you're going to have all this associated gas, which means that you're going to have lower natural gas prices. And so you got to get this into the system, right? So we need it to sustain the oil and gas industry. We're producing 136 billion cubic feet per day as of December 2025. Massive uptake, a 5 BCF a day growth in gas production. Literally, the market says we want the gas, and gas comes with it. And so super fast response mechanism. And so we have this gas, and if you build those turbines, and yeah, it's tight right now, but it probably won't be tight in like a year. So you build this gas turbines, you pull it into the system. That's super supportive for Texas, like where you produce it. I mean, this is basic energy security. And then also you work on exporting it, and you have this like a sustainable, reliable system where we're sustaining the natural gas sector in the U.S., supporting prices around $4 an MCF. We're keeping them, low for the American consumer. You actually have to have that sustained in order to sustain the output in the U.S. and give them the market. And you're putting those molecules on the water and literally saving the asses of everyone who is super exposed to the damn Middle East and was stupid enough, no offense, to sign long-term contracts with Qatar. And it's not like they harbor terrorists, and I think there's issues with them to begin with. But I just think that there's not a lot of excuses for being that naive about where your natural gas is coming from.
Yeah, and the Department of Energy official I was with recently, I won't say who it was, but he basically said if cost benefit analysis were being considered in electric generation, everything right now that was being built, every dollar would flow towards the construction of new natural gas generation. We saw just this week, Governor Abbott was at a new facility called Entergy. It's a new natural gas facility that's being added to Texas. So that's moving in the right direction. But again, over the last 5 years, we've only added 3 gigawatts of natural gas. We've added 53 gigawatts of wind, solar, and batteries. Those costs are astronomical. Ratepayers are going to be absorbing those for decades. We've got to right this ship and reform the market, not only in Texas, but we're a standalone grid. At least 80% of our geography and users are in a standalone grid called ERCOT. The other grids, other states need to adopt similar policies that reward reliability. And if they do, they'll be exporting electricity to their neighbors and reaping the rewards from those blue states that are forcing higher costs onto their ratepayers. So might be a good point to end there with kind of a call to action. Get your policymakers to reward reliability and not green new scam type of stuff. And so with that, any closing remarks, Trisha?
I think you covered it. I think that's great. It's Friday. Buckle up for the weekend and everything on going on, but we will keep you up to speed at the American Energy Institute. We'll have lots of stuff coming down the pipeline on the Petro Nerds podcast, but look forward to chatting again.
Godspeed to our officials that are headed to Pakistan. I think it's Pakistan for negotiations. Hopefully those are back on with Iran. I've seen some news this morning. They may be off.
I believe in France is hosting. We also have Hungarian elections in Hungary, and we have with Orban, and then we also have I believe is it France that's hosting, because they've like blockaded cities that's hosting talks as well.
Oh wow, okay, great. Well, Godspeed to our negotiators on the American side. Maybe we can get some stability back in the markets, and hopefully people will stop panicking, because I really think a lot of this has just been the result of emotions and panic.
To a degree.
And then Godspeed to Artemis on their return home. So they should be splashing down very soon.
Awesome. All right. Thanks, Jason.
Thanks so much. Keep living the high carbon lifestyle.
Bye.
We'll be back soon.